The youth, identified by police and neighbors only as Tony, is believed to be a grandson of occupant Benjamin John Sr. Police officers said Tony listened to heavy metal music, a rock genre that sometimes contains satanic references. The grandfather claims Tony had told him about sacrificing animals and performing satanic rituals in Puerto Rico. Anderson recalled a warm, stuffy feeling in Tony's bedroom where a large portable boombox tape player that I had seen on the desk moved under the bed all by itself. Police said family members sent the youth back to Puerto Rico by plane. When police arrived, Anderson said a frisbee sailed out the home's open front door and landed in the yard. I thought they had caught the burglar and they were fighting, throwing things, Anderson said. But when I asked if anybody had thrown anything, they all stood motionless. Meanwhile, police had still not filed an official report on the incident late Thursday. How would we classify this case? Anderson asked. It wasn't a burglary, but it was close to a vandalism. Even if we could classify it, who would we consider a suspect? An evil spirit? Well, I don't know about the suspect, but you can file it under evil. Ladies and gentlemen, the supernatural battle is real, and we're involved in it every single day of our lives. There is the side of good, and there is the side of evil. And if you don't believe that it's real, then Satan's already won the battle with you. It was evil that tried to stop Jesus' ministry and stalked him every place that he went. It was evil that plotted his death. It was evil that made the cross. It was evil that drove the nails. It was evil that planted the crown of thorns. And it was evil that watched him die, and as he died, evil laughed. But don't you ever forget, that Friday, evil won a battle, but on Sunday morning, evil lost the war. And then secondly, I want you to see not only the horrible certainty of evil, I want you to note the amazing willingness of God. 34, B and C. How often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Now, I can understand the 7 woes that preceded this. In fact, I can really relate to those verses. I used to have a terrible temper, and I fought it all the time to control. So when Jesus got ticked at the Pharisees and the scribes, I want you to know I can identify with that. That's my kind of scripture. I can understand Jesus being ticked about all those things. I can understand his anger over the stoning of the prophets who brought the truth. But you know what I can't understand? I can't understand Jesus in the midst of all of this anger and harshness, stopping and saying with great compassion and great sadness, how often I've longed to gather you guys to me. As a hen gathers her chicks, but you wouldn't come to me. Now listen, because I'm going to give you the essence of the Christian faith. And if anybody tells you this isn't the essence, they haven't understood it. It may surprise you, but it's true. So listen as I give you the essence of the Christian faith, and here it comes. The active love, acceptance, and forgiveness of God are drawn and attracted to the presence of human sin. Say it again. The active love, acceptance, and forgiveness of God are drawn and attracted to the presence of human sin. Love and I were studying the Psalms the other night, and we read Psalm 32. And it's a psalm that talks about David with his adulterous affair with Bathsheba. And he kept it a secret until he was found out, and then he confessed it to God. We talked about how the boys, Billy and Stevie and Andy, when they were little, they would try and hide things. Hide sin from us whenever they had done it. I mean, if you got kids, especially boys, you know how dirty they can get. You know how dirty their clothes can get. And as they were growing up little, they had church clothes and they had play clothes. And sometimes, after church, they wouldn't change clothes. And they'd ruin the good clothes that they had. When they do that, we noticed that there were 3 reactions that they could choose from. First of all, they could hide it. I mean, you might be cleaning out a closet or underneath the bed, and all of a sudden you find a sport coat with grass stains on the elbow. Or you find a pair of good pants with a hole in the knee. Because they've taken what they've done and tried to hide it. Then secondly, they can play dumb. Act surprised. What pair of pants, Mom? What hole in the knee? Oh, those pants, that hole in the knee. That's the one you're talking about. Or thirdly, they could just Confess it. Mom, I ripped a hole in my good pants because I didn't change after church. So whatever you're going to do to me, go ahead and do it so we can get this over with. I thought about that. I thought, we're the same way when we're dealing with our sin. We have the same three options. We can hide it. We can play dumb. Or we can go straight to the Father and confess it and ask for forgiveness. And the great thing about going to the Father is that He will never turn you away. Go to Him. He loves you more than you'll ever know. You remember over in the 9th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew where Jesus and the disciples are eating with the tax collectors and sinners. The Pharisees go to the disciples and say, do you know what your master is doing? He's eating with all those sinners and tax collectors. And Jesus overhears the conversation. And that's when Jesus gave us those wonderful words, and I want you to listen to them with your heart. This is what Jesus said. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Do you understand what Jesus is saying? He's saying that the only requirement for you to go to Him is that you be a sinner. And everybody meets that requirement. Listen, the Christian faith is the only club in the world where the only qualification for getting in is that you not be qualified. Say it again. The Christian faith is the only club in the world where the only qualification for getting in is that you not be qualified. This is a hospital for sinners. And the only requirement for admission is that you be a sinner. And incidentally, if you're wondering, you qualify. In Chicago, Skokie is the suburb where about 90% of the Jewish population lives. And as you know, Orthodox Judaism doesn't accept Jesus as the Messiah. I saw a huge billboard that some Christian had rented and put on as a message to the Jews as I was driving through one time, and I wrote it down. This is what it said. I love you. Is that okay, Jesus? I love you. Is that okay, Jesus? Folks, don't mix it up. Satan would love for you to believe that your guilt and sin will keep you from going to Jesus, but it's extremely the opposite. Your guilt and your sin are what propel you to Jesus. Your guilt and your sin are what draw you like a magnet to the love and the compassion and the forgiveness of Jesus. I have people come to me and say, preacher, you don't know what I've done. I can't go to Jesus because of all the dirt that's a part of my life. Let me tell you something. When Jesus climbed on the cross, He took your dirt with Him. He wrote paid in full across everything that you've ever done. He hung His head on His chest and He said, it is finished. He's willing to love you. He's willing to accept you. He's willing to forgive you. So go to Him. In Revelation 3:20, Jesus said, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in. If you've ever seen the famous painting of Jesus knocking at the door, then you're aware that in the painting there's no door handle on the outside of the door. Jesus can't force His way into your life. You've got to open the door. You've got to let Him in. And then thirdly, I want you to note the inevitable conclusion of rebellion. Verse 35a. Jesus says, look, your home is left to you desolate. There's nothing but sorrow and pathos in those words. Jesus is looking ahead 37 years to 70 AD, when Titus and the Roman army are going to sweep down into Jerusalem and burn the city. Tear it down. Not one stone left upon another. With tears welling up in His eyes, Jesus says, I don't want you to do this. I want you to understand. Guys, I want you to come to me. But you're not willing. But the inevitable result of rebellion is desolation. The multimillionaire whose company I ran in Chicago was dishonest, arrogant, rebellious, and sometimes downright mean. He refused to run his business with honesty and integrity, and he almost lost it. That's when he hired me to come in and take over. I showed him he could not only run the business with honesty and integrity, but he could do it and make more money than he never made before. Before I got there, he was a thief. He took advantage of every customer he had in any way that he could. I heard stories and witnessed his dishonesty you wouldn't believe, folks. I remember some of the service techs telling me stories about making service calls. One that he'd gone to a store, a huge supermarket in Chicago area. He'd gone to fix a meat saw. It wouldn't turn on. It wouldn't operate. He pulled it out from the wall. He looked, and it was unplugged. When they cleaned the night before, they unplugged it and forgot to plug it back in. So he plugged it in, went back to the van, got on the radio, asked for his next call. Teddy got on and said, "What do you mean you're leaving?" He said, "It was just an unplug. I just plugged it in." He said, "You go back in there and you open up that saw and you take the motor out and you tell them it was a motor. Take it out to your van, and that spray paint that I put in your van, you take that spray paint and you paint that motor, make it look like a new one and put it back in. You charge him for a new motor." Those were the kind of things that he did to his customers, his best customers. And a $79 service call turned into over $1,000 motor replacement repair. The friends that trusted him, he took advantage of the most. They wouldn't ask for the prices, and so he jacked the price up $2,000 or $3,000 because they didn't ask. Because they weren't shopping around, because they trusted him. He would promise things to customers that he couldn't deliver on. And I'd say, "Teddy, you can't do this forever," and not pay for it. And he'd say, "What's God going to do? Zap me with a lightning bolt and kill me?" I said, "God is going to balance his books someday. You can't rebel against him forever. You can't treat people the way you do." He had a 17-year-old son who was a neat kid. His name was Patrick. We spent a lot of time together. Patrick was articulate, had a great personality, a good-looking kid. When I left and went into the ministry, Patrick grew up in the business, and I heard later that he'd kind of taken over for his dad, and he was having that same battle with his dad that I had over operating the business honestly and with integrity. I heard that Pat became very successful later on. And then a few years back, Lev and I, on our anniversary, went to Chicago, and we went by the plant to see Teddy and the guys that used to work for me. I walked in, and we hugged, and we talked for just a couple of minutes, and I said, "Where's Patrick?" Teddy hung his head. Tears streamed down his cheeks. He said, "We lost Patrick in February." I said, "What happened?" He said, "I don't know. He got this strange, fast-growing, aggressive cancer in his stomach. And in 4 months, he was gone." In fact, he said Pat was on an operating table in Houston, Texas, while his wife was giving birth to their first son in Chicago, Illinois. I went up to Sharon, the secretary, afterwards, and I said, "How's Teddy doing?" She said, "Bill, he's broken. He's empty." The inevitable result of rebellion is desolation. You see, the world will tell you, take care of number one. The world will tell you God's not important. The world will tell you the poor, they're not your concern. You don't have to feed the starving. They're not your responsibility. The world will tell you, don't you be concerned with racism or abortion or pornography. They'll even tell you that God doesn't exist. They'll tell you to be concerned with acquisition